There are footsteps in the attic, but it has no floor. In most of our homes, there's a space we rarely go, a place that holds this strange power over our imagination. And no, I'm not talking about the basement, with its connection to the earth and all those primal fears. This space is different. It just floats. It's suspended between the safety of your home and the vast, empty sky. I'm talking about the attic. It's where we store the things we've forgotten. But what happens when the thing you've forgotten is still alive? What happens when you hear footsteps coming from a room that shouldn't even be there? A young man named Alex buys his first house. A beautiful old place for a price that seems way too good to be true. He's thrilled, totally ready for a fresh start. But on his very first night, as he's lying in bed, he hears it. A soft, steady pacing from the room, right above his head. The only problem is, the architectural plans for the house confirm the attic has no floor. It's just an empty, structural void, a space that only exists on paper. Section 1. For Alex, getting that 2-story Victorian house on the edge of town was a dream come true. It was a little rundown, sure, but it had character. The real estate agent called it a steal, a word Alex would later come to appreciate with some serious irony. That first week was a honeymoon of fresh paint and possibilities. He worked from dawn till dusk, stripping old wallpaper and sanding floors, turning this neglected building back into a home. It was exhausting work, but he felt like the master of his own little kingdom. The first time he heard the noise, he shrugged it off. It was almost 2 a.m, and old houses make noises. It was a soft, rhythmic thudding from above. Thump, thump, thump. Just the pipes, he told himself. Or maybe a squirrel that got into the eaves. It was normal. He rolled over and tried to get back to sleep, but the noise didn't stop. Night after night, it came back, and it started to sound more confident, more defined. This wasn't the random clanking of pipes. It was pacing. Small, light footsteps, almost like a child's, walking back and forth, right across the ceiling of his bedroom. Sometimes the pacing would stop, and a heavy silence would hang in the air that was almost worse than the noise itself. Then it would start up again, a little faster this time, a little more frantic. After a week of terrible sleep, Alex had to investigate. He searched the entire second-floor hallway for an attic access panel, some kind of pull-down cord, but he found nothing. The ceiling was a totally seamless, plaster expanse. It was bizarre. How was anyone supposed to service the roof or check the insulation? Annoyed and confused, he tried to forget it. But the footsteps wouldn't let him. They became a nightly torment, the first thing he'd listen for when the lights went out, and the last thing he'd hear before falling into an uneasy sleep. Section 2. The obsession started to take over. During the day, Alex would just find himself staring up at the ceiling, trying to map out the path of this invisible walker. The sound was always in the exact same spot, right above his bedroom. It never strayed. Then he started hearing other things, a soft, dry scraping sound, like a toy being dragged across bare wooden joists. That sound made the hair on his arms stand up. His friends started to notice the change in him. He was on edge, exhausted, and every conversation somehow found its way back to the noises in the house. They all had logical explanations: raccoons, faulty wiring, the house settling. One friend joked he had a madwoman in the attic, referencing some old book. But Alex knew it was more than that. The sounds were too deliberate, too personal. The breaking point came a month after he moved in. He was up on a stepladder patching a crack in the bedroom ceiling when the pacing started. But it was the middle of the day. The sound was directly over his head, so close he swore he could feel the vibrations through the plaster. Thump, 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 drag. He froze, his putty knife just hovering in the air. Impossible. He scrambled down the ladder, his heart hammering against his ribs. That afternoon, he drove to the county records office. He had to see the original blueprints, had to understand how this house was built. After about an hour of digging through dusty archives, the clerk handed him a big, rolled-up sheet of brittle, yellowed paper. He carefully unrolled it on a table. There it was, the Allister House, 1888. He found the second-floor layout, his fingers tracing the walls of his bedroom. And then he saw the section for the space above it. His blood ran cold. It wasn't just a label, it was a declaration written in elegant, spidery cursive. Attic, unfloored, non-structural void, do not access. There was no floor. There were never meant to be floorboards, just open air, wooden beams, and insulation. A dead space between the ceiling and the roof. The footsteps he was hearing were walking on nothing at all. The thought was so jarring, it made him feel sick. He was hearing the weight and movement of a person in a place where no one could possibly walk. Section 3. The blueprints weren't a comfort. They were proof that he wasn't just imagining things. Alex started a new, more frantic kind of research. He forgot about the house's structure and started digging into its history, spending hours in the local library, sifting through microfiche of old newspapers. The house was built by a wealthy family, the Allisters. They had one child, a son named Thomas. He found the boy's birth announcement from 1880. He found a few mentions of the family in old society pages. And then, in the autumn of 1887, he found the obituary. Thomas Allister, age 7, tragically passed away following a devastating household accident. It was short, sterile, and gave no details. This wasn't enough. Alex took his search online to historical societies and genealogy forums. And finally, he got a hit. A woman, a distant descendant of the Allister family, replied to one of his posts. She shared a digital copy of her great-great-grandmother's journal. The entries from 1887 told the whole, horrifying story. Thomas was not a quiet kid. He was, as the journal put it, full of a boundless and often troubling energy. He loved to climb. One afternoon, while the house was still under construction, the attic was just a skeleton of open rafters and beams. Chasing a ball, Thomas saw the open framework of the attic, and in a moment of pure childish impulse, he pulled himself up. He scrambled across the beams, laughing until his foot slipped. He fell right through the open space, crashing through the lath and plaster of the master bedroom ceiling below. He died instantly. The parents were destroyed, but their grief twisted into something dark and unnatural. According to the journal, they became obsessed with a fringe spiritualist belief that their son's spirit was now tied to the space where he died. So they made a terrifying decision. They ordered the builders to alter the plans. They had them seal the attic completely. No door, no hatch, no access of any kind. They believed that by not giving the attic a floor, they were creating a cage for their son's ghost. They reasoned that if he had nowhere to walk, nowhere to stand, his spirit could never leave. They entombed him in an architectural void, hoping to keep their son with them forever. Climax. Alex sat there in the dark of his living room, the words from the journal glowing on his laptop. A storm was raging outside, and with each clap of thunder, the house seemed to groan. And above him, the pacing had started. It was faster than he'd ever heard it, a frantic, desperate pattern that matched the beating of his own heart. For the first time, he thought he could hear something else mixed in with the sound, a faint, high-pitched whimpering. Suddenly, a deafening crack, far louder than the thunder, shook the entire house. It came from directly overhead. Alex stared, mesmerized, as a fine, white powder of plaster dust began to drift down from the master bedroom ceiling like snow. A small, dark stain was blooming in the center, spreading slowly outwards like a phantom ink blot. It looked wet. Then, total silence. The frantic pacing was gone. The whole house just held its breath. A new sound began. It wasn't footsteps. It was a slow, deliberate scrape. 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 The sound of something heavy being dragged. It moved from the center of the ceiling, where the stain was, slowly toward the wall. Alex felt a primal kind of fear he had never known. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The scraping reached the wall, and then it started to travel down. Inside the wall, right behind the plaster, something was descending, scraping inch by inch, its ghastly descent punctuated by the creak of old wooden lath. It sounded like something was climbing down the inside of his house. The sound stopped about 5 feet from the floor, right at head height. The house fell into a profound, terrifying silence, broken only by the rain drumming against the windows. Alex stood frozen, his eyes locked on the spot on the wall where the sound had stopped. And then a voice, so quiet it was almost lost in the storm, whispered from the plaster itself. It was the voice of a child, thin and reedy and full of a century of loneliness. "Can I come out now?" Alex didn't scream. The sound that came out of his throat was a choked, guttural gasp. He stumbled backward, his legs giving out, and scrambled out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and straight out the front door into the driving rain. He didn't look back. He just ran until the beautiful Victorian house was a dark silhouette against the stormy sky. He never set foot in it again. He ended up selling the house at a staggering loss to a property development company that barely even looked at it. In the disclosure forms, under the section for any known issues, he just wrote significant settling noises. Conclusion. The house still stands today, but it's empty now, its windows dark and hollow. The story of the Allister family and their terrible, grief-stricken solution is mostly lost to time, known only to Alex. But the parents' plan was flawed. They didn't build a cage to keep their son with them. They built a prison for a lonely, restless soul. And after more than a century of pacing in an impossible, floorless void, the prisoner had finally learned that you don't need a floor to walk, and you don't need a door to get out. The footsteps in the attic have stopped, because whatever was up there isn't in the attic anymore. So what's the most unsettling noise you've ever heard in your own home? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, do me a favor and investigate that like button and subscribe for more strange and scary content. It really helps the channel out. Thanks for watching.